Stay with me, because no one disappears like this unless they planned it. The elevator doors slid open with a soft metallic chime, and Charlotte Hayes stepped inside, one hand resting gently on her 7-month belly, her reflection staring back at her from the polished steel walls like a stranger she was still learning to recognize. And for a moment, everything felt still, too still, like the world was holding its breath. Then the overhead light flickered once, twice, and the camera feed cut for exactly 3 seconds, just long enough for something to change. Something no one would understand until it was too late. And when the footage came back online, the elevator was empty. Charlotte was gone. Not a trace, not a sound, just absence, the kind that echoes louder than any scream. And 3 days later, in a glass tower 10 miles away, Daniel Whitmore adjusted his cufflinks and signed a $40 million contract without hesitation, his signature clean, steady, practiced, as if his wife hadn't just vanished into thin air, as if nothing in his life had shifted at all. And when his assistant hesitated, mentioning Charlotte's name in a careful, almost apologetic tone, Daniel didn't look up, didn't ask questions, didn't even pause. He just said, "Handle it." Like she was a problem already filed away, already solved. And that was the first thing people noticed later, not the disappearance itself, but how quickly he moved on, how easily the silence settled around him. And that same night, Vanessa Cole walked into Charlotte's house like she'd been invited all along, her heels echoing across marble floors that still smelled faintly of lavender and something softer, something warmer, something that didn't belong to her. And she paused in the doorway of the master bedroom, her fingers brushing against the edge of the dresser where a single photo frame remained. Charlotte smiling quietly, one hand resting over the life she carried. And for just a second, Vanessa felt something she couldn't quite name, not guilt, not fear, just a flicker of unease that disappeared as quickly as it came, because this was supposed to be her moment, her upgrade, her future. And yet the house didn't feel empty. It felt watched, like Charlotte had stepped out but never really left. And miles away, in a private office overlooking the city, Lucas Bennett opened an email that shouldn't exist, timestamp 2:17 a.m., sender erased, subject line blank. And for a moment he considered closing it, ignoring it. But something about it pulled him in, something precise, intentional. And when he finally clicked open the attachment, his expression changed, not shock, not confusion, something colder, sharper, like recognition, like he had just been handed the first piece of a story no one else knew was being written. And back in that house, Vanessa stood alone in Charlotte's closet, surrounded by perfectly arranged dresses, untouched shoes, a life paused mid-motion. And on the top shelf sat a small, unmarked box, easy to miss, almost deliberately so. And when she reached for it, her fingers hesitated just long enough to betray the feeling building beneath her confidence, because somewhere, deep down, she knew this wasn't an accident. Charlotte hadn't disappeared. She had left something behind, something waiting to be found. And as Vanessa lifted the lid, the question settled in like a shadow that wouldn't move. What exactly had Charlotte prepared before she vanished? And why did it feel like everything was only just beginning? The house did not change overnight, but the feeling inside it did, like something invisible had shifted just enough to make every sound echo longer than it should. And Vanessa Cole noticed it first in the quiet moments, the ones she had expected to feel victorious, because this was supposed to be the beginning of her life with Daniel Whitmore, not a place where she hesitated before opening doors. Not a place where she found herself listening for footsteps that never came. And yet every corner of that home still carried Charlotte's presence in ways that could not be packed away or replaced. And it unsettled her more than she wanted to admit, especially when Daniel showed no interest in changing anything at all. He kept the same routines, the same schedule, the same cold precision in every decision, as if Charlotte had simply stepped out for a few hours instead of disappearing without explanation. And that calm, that complete lack of disruption, started to feel less like strength and more like avoidance. Because late at night, when the city lights reflected across the glass walls, Vanessa would catch him standing still, staring at nothing, his jaw tight, his thoughts somewhere far beyond the room. And when she asked if he was worried, he answered too quickly, "There is nothing to worry about." And the words landed flat, rehearsed, like Something he had decided long before she asked. And that was when the first real crack appeared, not in his empire, not in his reputation, but in the version of reality he was trying to maintain, because across the city, Lucas Bennett had not stopped reading that file. Not even once. He replayed the fragments, paused at every detail, every number, every missing second in that incomplete video. And what disturbed him was not what he saw, but what was deliberately left out, because Charlotte Hayes had not sent a message filled with panic or confusion. There was no plea for help, no emotional explanation, only structure, only precision, as if she had documented something she expected to be discovered. And that realization changed everything, because it meant this was not a disappearance born out of chaos. It was controlled, intentional, and somewhere in that control was a timeline Lucas had not yet fully understood. And back in the house, Vanessa finally opened the small box she had found, her fingers steady but her thoughts racing faster than she could control. Inside was the USB drive, plain, unmarked, and a folded piece of paper with a single handwritten line. Some things only make sense when you see the whole picture. And for a moment she almost laughed, dismissing it as meaningless. But the longer she held it, the more it felt like an instruction, not a message. And when she tried to access the drive, nothing happened. No files, no folders, just an empty interface. That made her frustration grow into something sharper, something closer to fear, because this was not how secrets behaved. Secrets did not hide this well unless they were meant to be unlocked later. And that was when she realized the most unsettling part of all. Charlotte had not left something for her to find. She had left something that required timing, something that would reveal itself when the conditions were right. And as that thought settled in, the quiet house no longer felt like a victory. It felt like the first stage of something much larger, something already in motion. And the question that refused to go away was not where Charlotte had gone, but why everything she left behind felt like it was waiting for something to happen next. Lucas Bennett did not believe in coincidences, and by the third time he replayed the corrupted video file, he was certain of one thing. Charlotte Hayes had not just documented her life, she had engineered what came after it. And that realization settled in slowly, like a weight that grew heavier the more he examined the details, because nothing about the file was careless. Every gap, every missing second, every incomplete transfer record pointed to intention, not error. And what troubled him most was the timing. The email had been sent minutes before Charlotte vanished, not hours, not days, which meant she had known exactly when everything would change. And people do not prepare like that unless they expect a point of no return. And across the city, in a house that no longer felt like a home, Vanessa Cole sat alone at the edge of the bed she had once imagined claiming as her own. The USB drive still connected to her laptop, the blank screen staring back at her like a locked door that refused to open, and she found herself replaying Charlotte's last expression from the photo she had seen earlier. Not sadness, not fear, just something distant, almost resolved. And it made Vanessa uneasy in a way she could not explain, because it suggested Charlotte had not been reacting to betrayal. She had been moving towards something, and that meant Vanessa had never been the center of this story, just a piece of it. A realization that lingered longer than she wanted, especially when Daniel walked in and asked what she was doing in a tone that was sharper than usual, his patience thinner, his control beginning to show cracks in small, almost invisible ways, like the way he poured a drink and did not touch it, like the way he checked his phone and frowned at messages he did not explain. And when Vanessa mentioned the USB, his reaction was immediate, too immediate. "Leave it," he said, not loudly, but firmly. And that single moment changed the air between them, because it was the first time he acknowledged Charlotte had left something behind. The first time he showed awareness instead of indifference, and it raised a question Vanessa could not ignore. How much did he already know? And why was he pretending otherwise? And miles away, Lucas leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on a single detail he had almost overlooked, a financial transfer scheduled but never completed, tied to an account that did not officially exist, one that required dual authorization, one that Charlotte alone could not finalize, which meant she had expected someone else to act, someone who had not yet done so. And that incomplete action was not a failure. It was a delay, a trigger waiting for the right condition. And suddenly the empty USB, the missing seconds in the video, the erased email trail, They all aligned into something far more deliberate than anyone had realized. Charlotte had not left answers. She had left stages, steps that would unfold only when certain people made certain choices. And in that moment, Lucas understood the most unsettling truth of all. The story had not ended when she disappeared. It had only just begun. And back in that quiet house, Vanessa closed the laptop slowly, her reflection staring back at her from the dark screen. And for the first time since Charlotte vanished, she felt something she could not dismiss, not doubt, not jealousy, but the creeping awareness that she had stepped into something she did not control, something already set in motion long before she arrived. And the question that lingered, sharper now, harder to ignore, was not whether Charlotte would return, but what would happen when the next piece of her plan finally revealed itself. By the fourth day, the silence was no longer something people ignored. It had started to attract attention, subtle at first, a missed call here, a concern message there, but patterns have a way of revealing themselves when they are broken, and Charlotte Hayes had always been consistent in her routines, in her communications, in the quiet way she stayed present even when she said very little. So when that presence disappeared completely, it did not take long for others to notice, and Daniel Whitmore knew that, which was why his responses became more controlled, more calculated. Every statement measured, every answer designed to close questions instead of invite them. But control has limits, and the first real disruption came not from the outside, but from within his own system. Because early that morning, a notification appeared that should not have existed, an automated alert tied to a dormant account, one that had not shown activity in over a year, and yet there it was, flagged, incomplete, waiting, and Daniel stared at it longer than necessary, his mind moving quickly, retracing steps, recalling details he had deliberately pushed aside, because he recognized the account, even if he had never acknowledged its purpose out loud, and that recognition unsettled him in a way he could not hide, not entirely. Because when Vanessa entered the room and asked if something was wrong, his answer came too late. "It is nothing," he said, but his tone betrayed him, and she heard it, felt it, that slight hesitation that confirmed what she had already begun to suspect. There were parts of this situation Daniel was not sharing, parts that existed before she ever entered his life, and that realization shifted her position completely, from participant to observer, from confident to cautious. Because if Charlotte had prepared something, and Daniel already knew pieces of it, then Vanessa was no longer in control of anything. And across the city, Lucas Bennett finally made a decision. He stopped analyzing and started acting, because patterns without action mean nothing, and Charlotte had not created this structure to be admired. She had built it to be triggered, and the incomplete transfer he had discovered was the key, not a mistake, not an oversight, but a mechanism, one that required a specific response to activate. And Lucas understood that if he waited, he would always be one step behind. So instead, he initiated the authorization request, a controlled move, precise, intentional, and for a moment nothing happened, just a quiet confirmation screen, a system waiting for the second approval, the one Charlotte could no longer provide. And yet as the seconds passed, something unexpected occurred. The system did not reject the request, it held it, suspended, as if recognizing that the absence of one party was part of the design, and then a secondary file unlocked, one that had not been visible before, and Lucas felt the shift immediately, because this was no longer passive information. This was progression, and back in the house, Vanessa stood in the hallway, the USB drive still in her hand, when her laptop suddenly chimed from the bedroom, a sound sharp enough to cut through the quiet. And when she opened the screen, her breath caught, not because of what she saw, but because of what had changed. The drive was no longer empty. Folders had appeared, organized, labeled, waiting, and for a second she did not move, because this was impossible unless something else had triggered it, unless someone else had acted. And in that moment, the connection became clear. Charlotte had not left behind scattered clues. She had built a system that responded, that evolved, that revealed itself step by step, and none of it depended on her being present. And as Vanessa hovered over the first file, her reflection faint in the screen, one thought settled in with quiet certainty. Whatever Charlotte started, it was still moving forward, and the next piece was already unfolding whether they were ready for it or not. The moment Vanessa clicked on the first folder, She realized this was not just a collection of files. It was a sequence, each piece arranged with a level of precision that made her pulse slow down instead of speed up, because fear does not always come from chaos. Sometimes it comes from order, and what she saw on the screen was not random. It was structured, labeled by dates, by events, by decisions. And the earliest file was titled simply Before, which made her hesitate for a second, longer than she wanted to admit, because it implied there was an after, and she was standing somewhere in between without understanding either side. And when she opened it, the first thing that appeared was not a document, not a message, but a timeline, clean, minimal, almost clinical, marking specific days over the past year, days Vanessa recognized without wanting to, the night Daniel canceled dinner without explanation, the weekend trip he claimed was business, the first time he stopped, answering Charlotte's calls in front of her, and suddenly those memories shifted, no longer moments she thought she controlled, but entries in a system she had never seen, and her chest tightened as a quiet realization settled in. Charlotte had been watching everything, not emotionally, not impulsively, but methodically, and across the city, Lucas Bennett opened the newly unlocked file at the exact same time, his expression sharpening as the same timeline appeared on his screen, but his version included something more: annotations, coded references, financial cross-links, details that connected personal moments to corporate decisions. And that was when he saw it, the pattern hidden beneath everything else. Charlotte had not just tracked behavior. She had mapped consequences, and every action Daniel took, every shift in loyalty, every moment of neglect, it all led somewhere. Somewhere measurable, somewhere actionable. And Lucas leaned forward slightly, his mind already moving ahead. Because this was not documentation for memory. This was preparation for impact. And back in the house, Vanessa scrolled further, her breathing slower now, more controlled, as if instinctively bracing for what came next, and the next folder was labeled Trigger. And this time she did not hesitate. She clicked immediately, only to find a single line of text on a blank screen. When the second approval is initiated. And for a moment nothing made sense, until her eyes shifted, until she realized what that meant. Somewhere, someone had already activated the next phase, and the USB had responded, not randomly, but precisely, exactly as Charlotte intended, and that realization sent a quiet wave of panic through her, not loud, not visible, but sharp enough to change everything, because it meant the system was no longer waiting, it was reacting, and Daniel was no longer ahead of the situation, he was inside it, whether he knew it or not. And in his office, Daniel stared at the same notification that had not disappeared, the incomplete authorization request still pending, still unresolved. And something about it felt wrong, not technically, but strategically, because he could not identify who initiated it. And that uncertainty, that lack of control, was something he had not felt in a long time. And when his phone buzzed again with a second alert, this time tied to a subsidiary account he thought was fully secured, his expression changed, just slightly, just enough to reveal the truth he had been avoiding. This was not random interference. This was targeted, deliberate, and somehow connected to Charlotte in a way he could no longer ignore. And back in the bedroom, Vanessa hovered over the next file, her reflection steady now, no longer uncertain, but something else entirely, something more cautious, more aware, because she understood one thing clearly. This was not about what Charlotte left behind. It was about what she set in motion. And as Vanessa clicked open the next folder, the screen shifted again, revealing a new set of files labeled After. And in that moment, the question that mattered most was no longer what Charlotte had done before she disappeared, but what exactly was about to happen next. Lucas did not open the After folder immediately, and that hesitation told him more than anything inside it could, because up until now, everything Charlotte had left behind was about preparation, observation, structure, but After implied execution, and execution meant consequences that could not be reversed. And across the city, Vanessa stared at the same word glowing on her screen, her finger hovering over the trackpad, her reflection sharper now, less uncertain, because somewhere between fear and curiosity, she had crossed into something else entirely, something closer to realization, that this was not a message meant to be understood all at once. It was meant to unfold, and she was already part of it whether she wanted to be or not. and when she finally clicked, the screen did not fill with chaos or exposure. It revealed something far quieter, a series of scheduled actions, each one timestamped, each one tied to a specific condition, financial disclosures set to release, legal documents prepared but not filed, internal audits queued but not executed, all waiting for triggers that had now begun to activate. And Vanessa leaned closer without realizing it, because this was not revenge in the way she expected. It was something colder, something more controlled, something that did not rely on confrontation but on inevitability. And in his office, Daniel Whitmore felt that inevitability began to press in, not through accusations or confrontation, but through disruption, subtle at first, an account temporarily locked, a partner requesting clarification, a call from legal asking about documentation that should have been routine, and each interruption by itself meant nothing. But together they formed a pattern, one Daniel could not ignore, because he understood systems, he understood timing, and this felt deliberate, precise, like someone had mapped out exactly where pressure should be applied and when. And when he finally opened the notification he had been avoiding, the incomplete authorization request still waiting, his expression hardened, because now he saw it clearly. This was not a random attempt, it was a sequence that had already begun, and somewhere inside that realization was a question he had not allowed himself to ask until now. What exactly had Charlotte known before she disappeared? And how far had she gone to ensure this moment would happen? And back in the house, Vanessa scrolled through the scheduled actions, her breathing steady but her thoughts racing faster than before, because each entry revealed a layer she had not considered, not just financial exposure, but reputation, influence, control, things that could not be rebuilt overnight, things that defined Daniel's entire world. And suddenly the scale of it became clear. Charlotte had not been trying to escape, she had been preparing to remove herself while everything else shifted in her absence. And the most unsettling part was how calm it all looked, how measured, how inevitable, like a chain reaction that did not need to be forced once it began. And then Vanessa saw something that made her pause completely, a final entry at the bottom of the list, not triggered yet, not active, but labeled in a way that made her chest tighten. Final confirmation. And there was no detail attached, no explanation, just a condition that had not yet been met. And for the first time since this began, Vanessa understood that whatever had already been set in motion was not the end of Charlotte's plan. It was only leading to something else, something that required one last action, one last decision. And across the city, Lucas saw the same entry appear on his screen, his eyes narrowing slightly as he realized that even he was not outside of this system. He was part of it now, just like Daniel, just like Vanessa, and the only question that remained was who would unknowingly trigger the final step, and what exactly would happen when they did. By the time the pressure became visible, it was already too late to stop it, not because anyone failed to act, but because every reaction they made was already part of the design. And Daniel Whitmore felt it first in the places he trusted the most, the systems that had always responded to him without hesitation, the calls that used to return immediately, the partners who never questioned his decisions. And now those same systems began to resist him in small, precise ways, a delay here, a request for verification there, nothing dramatic, nothing loud, just enough to force him to slow down, to notice. And Daniel did notice, because he understood patterns, and what he saw forming around him was not random disruption, it was alignment, multiple independent elements shifting in the same direction at the same time, and that only happens when something has been coordinated in advance. And for the first time since Charlotte disappeared, he allowed himself to think about her not as someone who left, but as someone who had stayed involved in a way he could not yet see, and that thought unsettled him more than any financial alert or legal inquiry ever could, because it suggested control he did not have. And across the city, Lucas Bennett sat quietly, watching the system continue to unfold exactly as Charlotte intended, not interfering, not accelerating, just observing the sequence as it revealed itself, because now he understood his role was not to stop it, but to witness it, to confirm that every step aligned with the structure she had built. And as each scheduled action triggered the next, Lucas saw the same thing Daniel was beginning to feel. This was not collapse, it was recalibration, a controlled dismantling of influence that left no clear point of resistance. And back in the house, Vanessa Cole stood in front of the mirror, the USB drive still connected behind her, the screen glowing softly in the dim light, reflecting a version of herself that no longer felt certain, no longer felt secure, because every file she opened revealed something she had not considered, not just about Daniel, but about her own place in this entire situation, and the deeper she went, the clearer it became. She had never been the outcome. She had been a variable, one Charlotte accounted for without ever needing to confront directly, and that realization shifted something inside her, something subtle but permanent, because for the first time she understood that Charlotte had not been reacting emotionally to betrayal. She had been preparing logically for its consequences, and Vanessa found herself stepping back from the screen, not out of fear, but out of recognition that whatever happened next would not be decided by her, or even by Daniel, but by the system already in motion. And then it happened, not loudly, not dramatically, but with a quiet notification that appeared simultaneously in two different places, on Daniel's secure network and on Lucas's screen, the same message, the same line, condition threshold reached. And for a moment, everything paused. Not physically, but mentally, because both men understood what that meant without needing explanation. Something had advanced, something had crossed from preparation into execution, and Daniel's hand hovered over his phone, his instincts pulling him toward action, toward control. But for the first time, he hesitated, because control now required understanding, and understanding required admitting that Charlotte had anticipated this exact moment. And somewhere within that hesitation was the realization he had been avoiding. He was no longer ahead of the situation, he was following it. And across the city, Lucas leaned forward slightly, his eyes fixed on the next line that appeared beneath the first, awaiting final confirmation. And that was when everything became clear. The system was not finished, it was waiting for one last input, one final action that would complete the sequence Charlotte had set in motion. And the most unsettling part was not what that action might be, but who would unknowingly trigger it. Because at that exact moment, in a quiet room filled with reflected light, Vanessa reached for the trackpad again, her mind racing, her thoughts sharper than ever before, completely unaware that the decision she was about to make could be the one Charlotte had been waiting for all along. Vanessa did not realize she was holding her breath until the cursor blinked back at her, steady, patient, waiting for a decision that suddenly felt heavier than anything she had faced before, because this was no longer curiosity, no longer about uncovering secrets or proving something to herself. This felt like a threshold, something that once crossed could not be undone, and yet the screen in front of her showed nothing dramatic. No warnings, no flashing alerts, just a single option tied to the final entry, confirm sequence. And for a moment she pulled her hand back, her reflection in the screen staring at her like someone asking a question she did not yet understand, because deep down she knew this was not meant for her. Charlotte had not designed this system for Vanessa to complete, and that thought should have stopped her, but it did not, because uncertainty has a way of pushing people forward when they feel they are losing control, and Vanessa had already felt that slipping away piece by piece. And across the city, Daniel Whitmore stood at the edge of his office, his phone pressed against his ear, listening to a voice on the other end explaining discrepancies that should not exist, partnerships freezing, internal audits accelerating without authorization, everything aligning in a way that made no logical sense unless it had been planned long before today. And for the first time, Daniel did not interrupt, did not correct, he simply listened, his mind moving through possibilities until it landed on the one he had avoided since the beginning. Charlotte had not disappeared to escape. She had stepped out to let something unfold without her interference, and that realization tightened something in his chest, not fear, not regret, but recognition, because he understood strategy, and this was strategy executed at a level he had not anticipated. And in that moment his phone buzzed again, a new alert, the same message Lucas had seen earlier, awaiting final confirmation. And this time Daniel did not hesitate. He opened the system, interfaced directly, his fingers moving quickly, searching for the point of control, the place where he could intervene. But every pathway led back to the same node, the same locked command waiting for input, and it did not belong to him. And miles away, Lucas Bennett watched the system stabilize into a quiet pause, every process held in place as if the entire structure was waiting for a single action to complete the design. And he did not move, did not interfere, because he understood now that intervention would only distort the outcome Charlotte intended. And if he wanted to understand the full extent of what she had built, he needed to let it happen exactly as she planned. And back in that dimly lit bedroom, Vanessa leaned forward again, her hesitation replaced by something sharper, more focused, because every part of her wanted clarity, wanted resolution, wanted to see what came next. And her thoughts aligned into a single justification. If Charlotte had left this behind, it was meant to be completed, meant to be seen through, and that belief, whether true or not, was enough to push her forward. And as her finger finally touched the trackpad, the system responded instantly, no delay, no confirmation window, just a quiet shift on the screen, the final entry disappearing as if it had never been there, replaced by a single line of text that appeared across every connected interface at the same time. In Daniel's office, in Lucas's system, and on Vanessa's screen, sequence confirmed. And for a moment, nothing else happened. No immediate collapse, no visible change, just silence. The kind that comes right before something irreversible takes shape. And Daniel stared at the message. Longer than he should have, because now there was no uncertainty left, no illusion of control. Only the realization that whatever Charlotte had set in motion had reached its final stage, and he had not been the one to stop it. And across the city, Lucas exhaled slowly, his eyes fixed on the next line beginning to load beneath the first. Something new, something that had not existed until this exact moment. And in that quiet room, Vanessa felt it too, not as a sound or a signal, but as a shift. In the air, a subtle awareness that the story she thought she was stepping into had just changed completely. Because somewhere, beyond the screens and the systems, beyond everything they could see or track, Charlotte Hayes was no longer just the architect of what was happening. She was about to become something else entirely, and none of them were ready for what that meant. The system did not explode into chaos the way people imagine when something powerful shifts. It moved quietly, precisely, like a door closing in another room that no one noticed until the silence felt different, and Daniel Whitmore understood that immediately, because the second line that appeared beneath, sequence confirmed, was not dramatic. It was final, ownership transfer initiated. And for the first time since this began, his control did not just weaken, it vanished, not all at once, but in a way that left no room to recover, because every system he accessed reflected the same reality. Access levels adjusted, authority restructured, permissions rerouted through channels he did not recognize, and none of it was flagged as an error, none of it triggered alarms, because from the system's perspective, this was not a breach, it was compliance. And Daniel's hand rested still on his desk as that realization settled in. Not anger, not panic, but something colder, something sharper, the understanding that he had been moved out of position without ever seeing it happen. And across the city, Lucas Bennett watched the final layer unfold with the same steady focus he had maintained from the beginning. But this time there was something different in his expression, not curiosity, not analysis, but respect. Because what Charlotte Hayes had constructed was not just a plan, it was a transition, one that required no confrontation, no declaration, only alignment. And as the last set of files unlocked on his screen, Lucas leaned forward slightly, because this was the part he had not seen before, the part that existed beyond preparation and execution, and the document that opened was simple, structured, and unmistakable. A legal framework that redefined ownership across multiple entities tied together through conditions that had now all been satisfied. And at the center of it, a name, not new, not hidden, but positioned differently, Charlotte Hayes, not as a beneficiary, not as a victim, but as the controlling authority of everything Daniel believed he still held. And back in the house, Vanessa Cole stared at her screen as the same information appeared in fragments. Pieces she did not fully understand, but felt the weight of immediately, because this was no longer about secrets or exposure. This was about power, and it had just shifted completely. And for a moment she stepped back, her reflection in the dark screen no longer confident, no longer certain, because she could see it now. She had not stepped into Charlotte's place, she had stepped into a space Charlotte had already designed to move without her. And that realization left her with a single, unsettling thought. Charlotte had never been trying to hold on to this life. She had been preparing to redefine it, and then, without warning, Another file appeared, one that had not been part of the system before, one that did not belong to the sequence or the structure, and both Lucas and Daniel saw it at the same time. A simple video. File, no label, no timestamp, just presence. And for a moment neither of them moved, because this was different. This was not part of the mechanism. This was personal. And when the video finally opened, the screen filled with a quiet, steady image. Charlotte Hayes, seated calmly, her hand resting over her stomach, her expression composed, not emotional, not distant, just present. And for a few seconds she said nothing, letting the silence settle, the same silence that had followed her disappearance. And then she spoke, her voice soft but clear. If you are watching this, it means the system worked exactly as intended. And she paused, not for effect, but as if giving the weight of that statement time to land. And Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. Lucas remained still, and Vanessa could only watch, because in that moment, Charlotte was no longer a question, no longer an absence. She was the one explaining everything. And yet what she said next did not resolve anything. It shifted it even further. I did not leave because I lost control, she continued, her eyes steady. I left because control was never the point. And for a brief second, there was something behind her expression, something deeper than strategy, something that hinted at a layer none of them had fully understood yet. And then the video ended, just like that. No explanation, no conclusion. Only a final frame that lingered a second too long before the screen went dark, and as the silence returned. Heavier now, more defined. One truth settled in across every room, every screen, every thought. Charlotte Hayes had not disappeared to escape. She had stepped away to let something inevitable take its place, and whatever came next was no longer something any of them could predict.